Hi, my name is Sarah Quezada, and I'm so grateful to be involved in this summit and being able to share a little bit with you today about some of my experiences walking alongside our immigrant and refugee neighbors and to help us think about what that kind of advocacy, what that kind of care might look like in the middle of some of these unusual circumstances that we are all finding ourselves in these days. And so my story with immigration really began in 2007 when I met my now husband Billy, who was an immigrant from Guatemala and who told me on our third date that he was without papers, that he was out of status, that he was undocumented in the United States. I thought I knew what that meant. I thought I knew things about our immigration system, but it turns out I had no idea. I didn't know what I didn't know. And as he and I began walking that journey together, I just was awakened to so many different facets of our immigration system. My general perspective and belief was, and to some extent still is, that laws are important and should be followed, and vulnerable people are important and should be welcomed. I thought our immigration system was that cut and dry, was that simple, that if someone was interested in being in the United States, like my now husband was, that was possible for them. They just needed to go through the proper paperwork protocols. I thought maybe he needed to take a half day off of work and go to an embassy of some kind. It wasn't until we really got into our relationship that I learned that there was no line for him to get in, that there was no pathway for him to pursue. And eventually, when we did decide to get married, that would become the one opportunity for him to be able to adjust his status. In the meantime, I learned all kinds of things about our immigration system, so much so that I wrote a book about it eventually. But I also learned about this phrase called mixed status family. And that's really what Billy and I were. I was a US citizen and he was out of status. And so our little family started out as a mixed status family. And I didn't really know anybody else who was a mixed status family, so that was new for me. But in reality, there's 16 million mixed status families in the United States. And as I began to learn more about immigration and look at it through the lens of my faith, I started to realize that for many of us who call ourselves Christians, we are part of a mixed status body of believers. That many of the migrants waiting at the border are doing so because they're compelled by their faith that God has a plan and protection for their children and for their family. And of the undocumented people that are already here in the United States, it's estimated that the overwhelming majority, over 80%, also identify as Christians. And so when we, as a mixed status Christian family, look at what's happening right now in our world, where we feel separated and distant, and we don't exactly know how to help. We see the suffering happening around us. We are worried about what might happen in the future. And for many of us, especially those who are connected and engaged in immigrant and refugee communities, this feels really heavy. And I think the question that comes out of us, for many of us, is, what on earth do we do? What do we do? I'm at home. I'm not necessarily leaving all that much. I'm not connected in some of the ways that I might normally feel familiar. And I think I live in Atlanta, which is far from the border. And so even I feel like I've been wrestling with that question for a while of what does it exactly look like to engage in some of the realities happening at our border when I am far away, when I am socially distant. And anytime I think about the helplessness feeling that many of us experience, I'm drawn to a story in the Bible that has meant a whole lot to me over the last couple of years as I've learned more and been more engaged with families at the border. And that is the story of Moses. Of course, many of us are familiar with that story, but I particularly want to draw attention to one character. So I'm going to read the story very quickly. I know many of us are familiar with it. But this is from Exodus 2. It says, "During this time, a man and a woman from the tribe of Levi got married. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw what a beautiful baby he was and kept him hidden for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a little basket made of papyrus reeds and waterproofed it with tar and pitch. She put the baby in the basket and laid it among the reeds along the edge of the Nile River. The baby's sister then stood at a distance, watching to see what would happen to him. Soon after this, one of Pharaoh's daughters came down to bathe in the river, and her servant girls walked along the riverbank. When the princess saw the little basket among the reeds, she told one of her servant girls to get it for her. And the princess opened it. She found a baby boy. His helpless cries touched her heart. "He must be one of the Hebrew children," she said. Then the baby's sister approached the princess. "Should I go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" she asked. "Yes, do," the princess replied. So the girl rushed home and called the baby's mother. "Take this child home and nurse him for me," the princess told her. "I will pay you for your help." So the baby's mother took her baby home and nursed him. I feel so connected to Miriam in this story. The sister who, and this feels so perfect for our time right now, the baby's sister, who is Miriam, stood at a distance watching to see what would happen to him. She was social distancing before it was all the rage. And we can learn a lot from Miriam's story. I feel like I have, at least. And so I just want to share that, and I hope that it will encourage your hearts as well. So what I am drawn to about Miriam is I keep thinking about what it must have been like to watch your baby brother in the Nile River. And so she was maybe, you could also say this was sort of a different look at the mixed status family situation, because her life was not in danger as a young Hebrew girl, but her brother's life was in danger. And she is standing at a distance watching to see what will happen to him. And I feel that helplessness when I think about her story. I think about maybe the dangers that she witnessed. I don't know exactly the whole circumstances of him being in the river and how she may have felt, these kind of moments like, is he going to dump out? Is he going to, go off or be, attacked by animals or any of those kinds of things? But she is watching with that stress of knowing not only that he's currently in a vulnerable situation, but that it could get much worse. And yet, she remains faithful in the task that her mother assigned her, which was to walk alongside her brother. And so I think for many of us who might be feeling helpless or feeling distant, we have this opportunity to continue in that faithfulness, whether that's calling and checking in on families we're connected to, seeing how they're doing. We might hear that pain, we might hear of that suffering, and it might be so frustrating to know there's nothing we can do, but we can be faithful to walk alongside our brothers and sisters in this time of vulnerability. For some of us, we may not be in those direct relationships, and so some of that might be taking this time to read and listen to stories of immigrants and really use, maybe if you have a little more space or free time, to go deeper into some of these experiences and walk alongside immigrant families in that way. And then what I love about this story is, I don't know if Miriam was asking herself, what do I do? What do I do? Should I get a stick? Should I jump in? Should I swim? Should I do all these things? But the reality is that God knew Moses was going to connect with Pharaoh's daughter. And at that moment, Miriam knew exactly what she was supposed to do. And that was to speak up to power on behalf of the vulnerable. And so she took that risk. She made that choice when the time was right. And so I think for many of us, there is an invitation to stay in the faithfulness, knowing that God will tell us what to do when the time is right. And I also think there's an invitation for us to use this time currently to speak up to power. And by that, I mean calling our lawmakers. And so for many of us, that feels sometimes just as helpless as standing by and watching. But my heart was super encouraged when zero tolerance was happening at the border. And we saw how people calling Congress, people speaking up, people saying, this is not right. We saw policy walked back, and we saw things change, and we saw suffering at least stop in some ways. And so there is opportunity in that. And a lot of people would have us believe that we're, just partisan operatives. We can't just be engaged citizens. But whether you voted for somebody or not, whether you agree with them on issues or not, you can keep calling and saying, hey, I want to see a better solution for dreamers. I want to see a better solution for asylum seekers. I want to see us continue to welcome unaccompanied minors at the border, even during this outbreak, because they are vulnerable. And so there's opportunity for us to voice and raise our voice and speak up to power, even in this time where we might feel far away and distanced and quarantined at home. And so these are really the things that I think I'm drawn to in Miriam's story, knowing that the solution that God had in mind for Moses' life was nothing Miriam could have ever imagined. She couldn't have said, hey, I'm going to go talk to the princess and see if she'll pay you to nurse and raise your own baby. But God was at work in ways that she could not understand. And that is my prayer for us in this time as well, which leads me to kind of my third thing that I feel like we can be doing and participating in during this pandemic season, and that is prayer. I think for many of us, myself included, when we're involved in advocacy and activism and relationships and service and all of those things that take so much of our time, we think about prayer as like, yes, we want to pray. We want to be a part of that. And we are going to do that at some point when things slow down. And so things are slowing down. And this is an opportunity for us to recommit ourselves and to really participate in prayer and ask God to move on behalf of the vulnerable, because we are at a distance and maybe can't do some of the things that we have become accustomed to doing. But God is always at work. And so it is not reliant on us doing the things, but we can come to God and pray on behalf of the vulnerable. For the last couple of months, I've been feeling this compulsion to invite people to pray for Stephen Miller, who, if you don't know that name, is one of the policy architects that has created a lot of our political policy around immigration and refugees over the last couple of years, and is a trusted advisor of President Trump. And it has been a challenge. It has been a challenge to pray for someone that I disagree with a lot of the things that he is doing policy-wise. And yet, God has been at work in my own heart as I continue to pray for someone and try to be faithful in that invitation to pray for our leaders and to pray even for those with whom I disagree. And so if that's something you're ever interested in, I have a 10-day prayer series that you can download or you can sign up for free. It's at sarahquezada.com/Stephen Miller. And you can go through that if that will help give you some structure to prayer. But I would also encourage you to pray for our neighbors during this time. And so I hope that you found some encouragement in this conversation, in the life of Miriam. She has been such a gift to me over the last few years as things have felt heavy, and knowing that we are invited to walk alongside, to be faithful, and to recognize that God is at work. And when the time is right, we are ready and willing to speak up to power, to act in any ways that God invites us to. But ultimately, it's God's story being told. And so I hope that encourages you. Have a wonderful day and enjoy the summit.